He is the friendliest guy you'll ever know. If you'd ask anybody that knows him, he's the type of guy that would drop anything to go help you. As everybody knows, they had undercover police there and women, and they did a lot of flirting. And one of the other co-accused really enjoyed that. I don't know how to put it. Of the four, I think they had the least on my son.
This is a fund only for Chris, only about his facts. Ezra Levant here. I am in sunny Sierra Vista, Arizona, but I'm not here on a vacation. It's gorgeous here, but I'm just here to meet the mother of one of the so-called Coutts Four, one of the four men who's been in jail for 2 years since participating in the Coutts border blockade. She's down here taking a little R&R before coming back up to Alberta for the trial of her son, Chris Carbert, along with another member of the Coutts Four, Tony Olienick. 2 others have already pled guilty. I wanted to get to know the family a little bit, because all I've read about them has been through journalists who are hostile to freedom protesters, and frankly, from police and prosecution who I now believe have exaggerated or even lied about the men. And joining me for the next half hour is the mom of Chris Carbert, Betty Carbert. Thanks for inviting me into your home.
Thank you for asking me to join you.
You know, I want to tell you, and this is what I told Chris when I visited him in jail in Lethbridge. When the news broke that police had arrested 4 men for conspiracy to commit murder against the police, I was shocked, and I think that was the whole purpose of the press release and the press conference, is to shock people. No, this trucker convoy isn't about bouncy castles and hot tubs. It's not about, lighthearted, peaceful protests. It's about a violent insurrection. And the police had so much of what they claimed was evidence, it struck me as credible. But over time, I've started to doubt that, especially when the police cut a plea deal, when the prosecutors cut a plea deal for 2 of the Coutts Four for extremely minor offenses. I guess what I'm saying, Betty, is I do not believe now what I believed then. I do not believe your son did what the police said he did. And I actually think he's been falsely accused.
And I think you're right. It was a shock to me, because everybody might say that I'm his mom, and so I'm a little biased, but I also, because I'm his mom, I feel that I know him best. Because of that, I know that Chris couldn't possibly participate in what he's being accused of for many reasons.
I'm going to talk about those reasons because it's true. Every mother loves their son. Every mother remembers their son as a baby.
Yeah.
And as a little boy. And even the mothers of actual criminals feel that way. But I want to talk a little bit. Let's start with Chris and who he is and how he wound up at the blockade, because he was one of the peaceful protesters there.
Yeah.
He just also was one of the 4 who were swept up in this RCMP raid. Tell me about how it started. Why did he go to the blockade? Why did he go to this protest? And what did he tell you about it? Was he in touch with you during the protest? What do you know about that?
Yeah, he would text me probably every day just to keep me up to date on what was happening. He was there because of the truckers. Like he felt that the COVID mandates, it was affecting everybody. Anybody with a business where they were depending on products going and coming from the US, and the truckers having to find, probably new jobs, because the ones that wouldn't take the shot could no longer go across the border. So he was there to support them.
What was his business? What did he do?
Chris had a very successful fencing landscaping business. He'd worked really hard at getting it going, and in a short period of time, he won 3 local awards for the quality of his work, and not sure what else, but probably on how he treated his customers.
So he was a real guy in the community. He wasn't.
Absolutely.
He wasn't a rogue figure. He wasn't a marginal guy. He was a member of the community.
Oh, absolutely. He was, and he was a single dad. He raised his son since he was a baby, and there's another reason why I know that he would never have done what they were accusing him, because he would never put himself in a position where he would be taken away from his son or not be there for his son.
When I visited Chris in prison, he said he hadn't seen a tree in 2 years. That's a very sad way of describing life in prison. What has become of his son? I mean, he's not with his dad in prison. What I can only imagine.
Yeah, it's well, for the first several months, he actually was with me, and then because every day we'd think, well, they're going to realize they made a mistake, and he would get out. So then Kyler would go back to his dad. But when we realized this wasn't going to happen, he actually went to Kelowna. That's where his mother is, and his sister. And so that's where he's been since.
You know, when I was in jail visiting him, he had some artwork. He had done some crafts that he was giving to his brother to pass on to his kids.
Yes.
And so obviously they're on the top of his mind. I imagine the stress on Chris in jail and the loss of his family. But it sounds like this whole event has created stress for the entire family. There's, I don't want to ascribe the death of his brother to this or the death of his father to this. Mm-hmm. But during his incarceration, a lot of problems seem to get worse. Tell me what's happened to the family during his jail.
This last 2 years have been absolutely crazy. Because of the deaths that you spoke about, that made it really hard, on all of us, because they were very close to Chris.
Did they allow Chris out to go to the funerals?
No.
They didn't allow him to go out to the funeral of his own dad?
No.
Funeral of his own brother? They didn't allow him out of jail to go to the funeral of his own brother?
No. They, for his brother, they let him watch a Zoom type of thing to see the funeral, and that was after a battle with them. And they finally gave in. They said, first of all, they were going to let him record it and then let him see it, but we wanted him to be there sort of in person. So he did get to see that, but not for anything for his father. And that was what's very hard, is like losing your family members while you're incarcerated, and no one can comfort you in the normal way of comforting, like hugs and just being there.
Even in the prison visiting room, there's a glass wall. You're speaking through telephones. Mm-hmm. Everything is recorded. There's a guard just there. There's no human contact.
There's none. Right there, like in remand, you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, but they treat you like you're guilty.
He's been in prison for about 2 years.
Over 2 years.
A little more than that now. Mm-hmm. In Canada, to serve 2 years of hard time, really that's a sentence of a multiple, because of course we have day parole and full parole. And
right.
No one actually serves their entire sentence. No one.
No.
So to actually do 2+ years in prison would be equivalent to being convicted of manslaughter or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's still hasn't even gone to trial, so he's not even been found guilty or innocent, and yet he's served all this time already.
When the police rolled out the charges, they had a real splash. They had a press conference, they had a photo they distributed where they lined up all these firearms. They made sort of a pretty display, a very artistic display.
Yes.
And I think they exaggerated. And they exaggerated for the Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa news market. Mm-hmm. The regular shotguns and rifles that are commonplace in a small town like Lethbridge or Coutts or whatever are shocking to city dwellers in Toronto. Even though you weren't a first-hand witness, you weren't there.
Right.
But you know about it, and I think it's safe to ask you about it in a way that you won't be compelled to testify, because from a legal point of view, what you're saying is, I suppose, technically hearsay.
Right.
But I can't interview your son on camera, because I can't bring a camera into the prison. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't want to interview him on camera, because his lawyer would say, don't say anything on camera, you could prejudice the trial. Mm-hmm. But I believe that I can talk to you in a way that you can make the case for your son, Chris, without prejudicing the trial or getting yourself into a pickle. 4 men, 4 very different men were charged together in this conspiracy.
Right.
4 men who didn't actually even know all of each other. They were all lumped together as the Coutts Four, even though one of them, Jerry Morin, he was not even there in the main.
No.
He was arrested on his way down there. To lump him in and to say these 4, but they needed a bunch of charges if they were going to call it a conspiracy. I think this whole thing was done to give a pretext to the Emergencies Act, because Trudeau didn't have the necessary national crisis to invoke martial law. So I think he basically let the word out, give me something to go on. I don't care if you have to exaggerate it or stretch it. Okay, boss, we've got a conspiracy to commit murder. We got 4 guys, and they're in Alberta, and we don't like Albertans. And a couple of them have firearms because they're good old boys. Okay, that's perfect. And unlike the Ottawa truckers, it's not bouncy castles and hot tubs. There's not a lot of cameras down there. Do it. Like, I think it was a stitch-up. Why don't you tell me the facts? What was Chris doing? What happened to Chris? What was he charged with? And how are those charges exaggerated, if they were?
As you know, it's a conspiracy to commit murder. And then
It's a shocking phrase to say.
yes,
You hesitated even saying it because it's not something a mother says about their son.
no, it's not. And to me, of course, that's just a joke, because
It's an unfunny joke.
it's not funny. No, it's not. But and to even entertain it for me is just yeah, I can't. It's unbelievable.
Is he that kind of a guy? Is
Not
he,
at all. He is the friendliest guy you'll ever know. If you'd ask anybody that knows him, he's the type of guy that would drop anything to go help you.
Well, we'll come back to that, because I think that was part of his undoing. I think one of the reasons he was charged is because he was trusting and helpful, but we'll get to that later.
Okay.
Come back to my first question. Tell me what happened. Tell me what happened that caused the police to arrest him.
He had invited a gentleman into his trailer to sleep who had been staying in his truck, and it was really cold, so Chris had an extra spot in his trailer.
Tell me what you mean by a trailer. Was it like a permanently parked trailer, or is it like a RV? Tell me what you mean by a trailer.
It was just well, he called it his hunting trailer, and that's what he would take with him to go hunting and stuff. And
So you tow it behind a pickup
tow
truck.
behind a truck. Yes.
So there was another protester who was sleeping in the back of his truck, and it was bloody cold. It was like minus
Yes.
20. And Chris said, "Hey, you don't have to sleep in your truck. You
That's
can
it.
sleep in my trailer, which is like an RV." And so did Chris know this other fella?
He knew him. He did meet him once, and but he didn't really you can't call him him. He knew who he was.
It's a small town. You gotta
Yeah,
meet
you
people.
know, and so yeah, he invited him in, and they of course got to know each other a little bit and hung out a bit when they were out in the crowds and stuff. And yeah, then I'm not, I wasn't there, so I'm not too sure, but I think, as everybody knows, they had undercover police there and women, and they did a lot of flirting. And one of the other co-accused really enjoyed that. I don't know how to put it. And he was a big talker, and he just enjoyed being around them.
You're
And
talking about someone else. You're not talking about Chris now.
no, I'm not talking about Chris.
Now,
I'm
can I ask
talking one of the co-accused.
And you don't want to say the name of the co-accused.
I don't know if I should say the name
right.
of him,
All right.
but
But let me back up. I just want to make sure our viewers are crystal clear. So so what you're talking about, the guy who borrowed your son's trailer to stay warm, that was the guest. Let me just say the house guest,
Okay.
the trailer guest
Yes.
was the one who took the honey trap.
yes.
That place was swarming with cops. Some of them were in uniform, some of them were not in uniform, and some of them were undercover, and some of them were younger women who batted eyelashes, and you got a bunch of men in the company of men for a week, and you see a young woman who's going to pay attention to you.
Yeah.
That's a nice change of pace.
Yeah, absolutely.
They just happen
know?
to be cops.
Yep, because going to the protest, I don't believe it's something you would say all day long. It's fun. It wears on you, but you just want to be there and be supportive. So, you put up with the boredom and such. So I think when these undercovers came around for some of the men, it gave them a distraction from the everyday.
The house guest.
The house guest.
In his 40s.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how often a man in his 40s gets attention from a woman in her 20s.
Yes.
Who hangs on his every word.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, tell me more.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that these cops entrapped anyone. I don't think it was a sting. I think they just paid very close attention and gave lots of good nonverbal feedback and said, tell me more. And I think that the house guest, a bit of a braggart, as maybe one is when talking to someone you're trying to woo.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this is from my outside perspective, having read the police information to obtain, having read some of the statements, some of which have been published. There was a variation on the publication ban, so some of it has been legally published.
Yes.
I think the old World War II saying, loose lips sink ships. I think there was one guy in this protest who was a bit of a barroom Napoleon.
Absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind, because I have been privy to the disclosures, and one name comes up in it constantly, and I mean constantly, almost every sentence or two. And very few other names were ever brought up.
And I'm not 100% sure why you're not saying this name. I think it's because you're not looking for drama,
Yeah.
and you're not looking for a quarrel, and you're not looking for a fight.
That's right.
But let me just put it this way. There are two men who already took a plea deal, and then there are two men who did not. And the two men who did not are your son, Chris Carbert, and another man named Tony Olienick. And there couldn't be a greater difference to me in these two men.
Absolutely, they are.
So how did it happen? How did it go down? So the house guest, let's call him that, is staying at your son's trailer to get out of the cold.
Mm-hmm.
And it's your hunting trailer, so you've got some firearms. Were the firearms properly stored in that trailer?
Well, for sure Chris's were. That's never been an issue. They were stored. As far as I'm not sure whether the other men in the trailer had theirs stored properly or not, because I was not there to witness it.
Right.
But everything that the RCMP and such have put out there make it look like this stash of firearms all came out of Chris's trailer, which is not true at all. There was several other people charged with firearm related on the same property.
Yeah.
And the majority of those weapons were from them.
Mentioning weapon is terrifying, and that's the reason why Rebel News and the Democracy Fund did not at first defend so-called Coutts Four, because we crowdfunded the money for what we called civil liberties or civil disobedience or peaceful protest. And when we heard weapons, guns, it freaked everybody out. I think it freaked out most of the men in Coutts, because that was, when they saw that, they said, okay, the blockade basically ended, because I think a lot of the men said, we don't want to be a part of this. I think that was a very strategic move by the RCMP to change the narrative and to cause friends and allies to pull away.
Right, yeah. And again, bringing it back to people pulling away, I will pretty much guarantee, because it is southern Alberta and a lot of farmers and such, that if they had checked most trailers and or vehicles that were there, they would have found some kind of a weapon, because that's just how it is.
I grew up west of Calgary. As a teenager, every single one of my neighbors had guns. But we were the only family that didn't have firearms.
Yeah.
It's weird not to have fire. If you're in the country, how are you? The police, there's no such thing as 911 in the middle of the country.
No.
And
back in the day, we had them hanging across the window of the truck, right?
Yeah.
Like,
But this is alien to Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal. And the idea that anyone would be hunting and have a hunting trailer is so alien and foreign.
Right.
And that can be easily elided into, well, this is a conspiracy to commit murder.
Right.
I want to tell you, Betty, it didn't help that there were people who wanted to ham up that this is like a revolution. Like there were some people online in particular, I refer to the diagolon, guys who just were, want this idea of I don't know about a militia, or like there were some people who were egging on that narrative. And I'm not asking you to criticize anybody, but there were some people hollering online for a greater showdown. I don't think it was the men in Coutts. I certainly don't think it was your son Chris, but I can see how the RCMP said, all right, let's take some hunting rifles plus some big talk. One of these guys with a bit of booze in him, maybe some big talk to some undercover officers, and this internet rhetoric of, an uprising. Let's put it all in a pot and call that a conspiracy to commit murder. I think a lot of things went wrong at the same time. Big talk to an undercover cop, throw in some firearms for shock effect, and then have a narrative of an uprising.
Yeah, of course. And then they take words out of context, or only share a certain amount of what, for example, on their phone taps, or they're looking through Facebook things and stuff. They only shared what they thought proved their narrative.
And that's the thing, there were so many police, and there were so many gigabytes worth of records.
Right.
And like they tapped so many calls, and they had so many officers writing up so many notes. Like it was a standoff for days. And I understand that they, for example, did not give Chris his phone back for 2 years, so he couldn't respond to what they claimed he texted.
Absolutely.
Did they keep his property for 2 years?
And then they finally sent him his phone data. He couldn't open it because it was way too advanced for what they're allowed to use in the jail. And even if he was out, he could not have done it. My younger son ended up opening it finally, and he still couldn't get everything because it wasn't all sent.
That, the purpose of disclosure is to give the accused all the case of the police, but also, and this is the most important part, any exculpatory facts.
Yes.
As in, the prosecutor has to give things that show innocence, or that show that the crime was not made out. Your son, for example, sent a text message to people saying, come to the Coutts blockade for a peaceful protest.
That's right.
A peaceful protest. That does not sound like a conspiracy to commit murder to me.
No, absolutely not. And he did that with more people that would phone him and say, how are things going? He says, he's good. And he did actually commend the police there, that they were being good, but they had no issues and stuff with them.
In fact, when the house guest was raided, Chris heard about it. He said, oh, well, that's too big. Tell me what he did.
He went back to bed because he thought, well, that's unfortunate. He says, he'd probably learn more the next day exactly what happened. And he wasn't
He had no guilty mind.
No guilty mind, or he would have tried to leave.
Yeah.
There's no doubt.
When you're sending text messages saying, come to the peaceful protest, when your house guest gets arrested and you say, oh, all right, well, he must have done something, I'm going back to bed. That's not a conspirator.
No, it's definitely not. But like again, I said, they will take things out of context when they can. And if you use a certain word, apparently, like war, we all know that word can gets thrown around all the time.
There were stupid uses of words.
Absolutely, and we've all guilty of that.
It's true, especially with younger guys with maybe a beer or two in them, and especially when you're showing off to lady cops that you don't know are cops. It's just the worst time in the world to have that kind of talk when you're surrounded by cops.
Yeah, it is.
You know what? Jerry Morin, one of the Coutts Four who pled guilty, his guilty plea, and he may have said, I'll sign anything just to get out of jail.
Right.
I mean, we'll never actually know.
We weren't there.
Because he may have said, I'll sign anything, just let me out of jail. 2 years of my life is gone. Let me get my life back. So maybe he actually signed it under duress. Wouldn't surprise me. But he said, in his guilty plea, he said that he agreed to bring guns to the protest. That's stupid.
Yeah, that's
it's
what
true.
he said, and then he also, in the next line, said, "But I didn't."
Yeah, and that's an important point. And it was when I saw that plea bargain and the one by Chris Lysak, I thought, if that's the best they got, then that's the moment, Betty, when I thought this is a stitch up.
Exactly.
Because conspiracy to commit murder of a police officer is tantamount. I mean, the only thing that would be worse is if, God forbid, they actually tried to do it.
Exactly.
It's so grave. And if you're letting two men go with offenses so minor that had they been charged as a standalone offense, like Chris Lysak, I forget the exact wording of what he pled guilty to, it was so minor that if you just found someone who had done that, he wouldn't even spend a day in jail.
He wouldn't have.
Just loses maybe a gun license for 5 years and slap on the wrist.
That's right.
And that's when I knew that the police and the prosecutors had exaggerated, and this is not just a rhetorical exaggeration, had over-prosecuted, overcharged, 2 years in prison before they admitted they didn't have anything. And I always thought that Jerry Morin and Chris Lysak were the two, quote, easier to convict of the four. I didn't know enough about Tony at the time. But it seems to me that if those two men can get a plea deal, if Chris's real crime is letting someone sleep in his trailer, I don't know if, I don't think I'm going to ask you if they offered him a plea deal because I don't want to get into...
Yeah, they didn't. I'm going to say so.
Okay,
He was never offered.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? They didn't offer your son Chris a deal, even though your son did not do what Jerry Morin did. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and I will say that of the four, I think they had the least on my son of evidence.
I think now that I'm learning more, I think that's my assessment as well. I
think for some reason, I don't understand it, but I think just the fact that it was his trailer, they're kind of using that as one of their things against him.
You know, I was in court when they were arguing over the validity of the search warrant. Now, that's still covered by a publication ban, so I regret that I cannot tell you what I heard in court that day. But it led me to believe even more so that the charges against Chris were BS. Here's my theory, Betty. A conspiracy, you cannot have a conspiracy of one.
No.
You need, by definition, at least one other person. That's not much of a conspiracy, but it's more than one person.
So how do they
So if Jerry Morin and Chris Lysak are pled out, and you have the big talker who was bragging to the lady cops about how tough he was, and you need one other guy to make it a conspiracy or it all falls apart. I think Chris Carbert, your son, is there as the plus one.
You know, mom or not, that's what I truly believe too.
Well, you know, I told you why at the time Rebel News did not hire lawyers for the Coutts Four. We did send lawyers, as you know. Initially, we sent 4 lawyers in for bail, and they spent some time on it. Then the men basically hired their own lawyers after that. But the reasoning we had was the charges on the face of them were not civil liberties charges. They were serious criminal charges. But after seeing the 2 pleas, after learning more, after visiting your son in jail and talking to him, and I've talked to him on the phone a couple of times, I am of the belief that even though the charges against him still say conspiracy to commit murder, I believe that that is a false prosecution. I don't think that it would be fiduciary of me to take donor money for civil liberties for a man who still faces serious violent charges, even if I think those violent charges are baseless. But, and I think you know this, we set up a website called helpchris.ca just for Chris. And the reason we set up a separate fund is so that the donor intent is clear, so that no one can say, hey, he's charged with a violent crime. Why are you taking my civil liberties dollars for that fella?
Right.
This is a fund only for Chris, only about his facts. There may be some people out there who say, no, he obviously did a horrific thing. I'm not going to give.
It's always going to be those people.
And we haven't had the trial yet, so we don't know. But I am personally of the view that the charges against them are false and that this is actually a horrendous lie that was national in scale, that these 4 men were actually used as a kind of cannon fodder to give the pretext for the Emergencies Act.
Absolutely.
The timing was too perfect. The timing was too perfect.
Yeah, and to me too, when they talk about they were an imminent threat, that came out 4 days, 3 or 4 days before the arrests. I don't get that. If it was imminent, why didn't they do something about it right there and then?
Yeah.
And the guns that they were accused of going to bring in, that were never found, but they still use it as guns that possibly were brought in, and yet nobody ever followed them to see if these guns were coming because they thought that was, to the undercovers, that was a threat. Yeah. So, yeah.
There's certain things I would say about the trailer and the guns, but they're subject to a publication ban. I've sat in that court a number of times, and yet I'm able to report nothing. And the reason for that is there's a convention in Canada, especially when there's a jury trial. A lot of the things that the police accusations that are used to deny someone bail, for example, or that are used for a search warrant, those police accusations have not been tested. They haven't been challenged. They haven't been disputed.
Yes.
So you don't want those allegations in the world because that could taint a jury.
Exactly, I agree.
And so it's a very difficult thing for a chatty guy like me to know evidence but not be able to talk about it.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
It started when I read the ITOs, the Information to Obtain Search Warrants, and I saw all the police accusations and I was shocked and persuaded by them. But when I visited court, I had the opposite effect. I saw the weakness of the police case, and unfortunately I cannot talk about it until it's introduced at trial. I want to tell you, Betty, that I will be, for at least some of the hearing of Chris and the other accused, but we have dispatched our reporter from Ottawa named Robert Krajcik, who has been doing a great job reporting on Tamara Leach's trial. He's attended, that trial is enormous, it's over 30 days, so 40 days now. So it's been going on for months. Yes. So Robert is very sympathetic to truckers. He's done a really good job of explaining the case in the Tamara Leach matter. So he has agreed to cover all of the trial of your son and another group of men called the Coutts 3.
Yes.
So Robert will be there. I'll be there for some of it. Obviously, you're coming back for the trial.
Yes. I'll be there for the Coutts 3 too.
We will. Okay.
Yes.
I'll see you there.
Yes.
It's a shame, this whole thing. I believe that the truckers saved the country, by the way. I believe they saved the country from deeper tyranny. And I believe that the invocation of martial law showed the kind of tyranny that we could have faced. And I believe that the prosecutions of Tamara Leach, Arthur Pawlowski, Chris Carbert, and others is a kind of Empire Strikes Back move, a kind of vengeance, a kind of I'll show you move by the state. How dare you working class nobodies stand up to fancy Ottawa and Theresa Tam and Justin Trudeau.
And how can they, this far in, admit that they were wrong?
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing. Now, miracles can happen. A couple months ago, when the federal court ruled that the invocation of the Emergencies Act was illegal and unconstitutional, it was a very dramatic ruling, Betty.
It was.
And the words that judge used were bold. That says that sometimes justice comes late, but it comes.
Yes, and that's how I feel. And I have to remain hopeful that somebody is honorable enough to recognize the truth, and somebody will do something to change this.
Well, there'll be a jury there.
Yeah, I'm hoping, I hope that was a good choice as a jury. Because,
I think so too.
You know, so, yeah, because you don't know who you're dealing with when it comes to judges and Crown prosecutors, who they are, the way they think. So, yeah, I think we have to depend on a jury. to be unbiased.
Well, I'm very interested in the case. I'd like to encourage our viewers to chip in to helpchris.ca. All those funds will go. I've spoken with Chris's lawyer, Catherine Bayak, and I saw her in action. I feel like she's strong.
I think she's great.
And I hope that my hunch is right, and I hope that your mother's intuition and your own knowledge is correct. I hope that he is acquitted and released. Now that presents another problem. How do you compensate a man who's had 2 years of his life stolen,
Absolutely.
who's been taken away from his son? That's the worst part of it.
That's the worst. Absolutely. Yeah.
I'll be candid, when I met him in prison, he seemed like a good man, but he seemed shell-shocked in a way. He seemed shattered in a way, and I don't say that in any disparaging way. I'm just telling you, you can't put a man in prison for 2 years and expect him to be himself.
He's not himself. I know when he gets out, because he is going to get out, it's going to take some time to adjust to the real world, because this has been an experience that, needless to say, he would not want to repeat. Especially when you know you're innocent. Like, it's every day is a nightmare, wondering why, how are you still there?
I have not read the disclosure in the case. It's not for me to read. I will learn about the facts through trial like everyone else. But what I've heard from him directly, what I've heard from his brother Matthew, what I've heard from you today, and what I've heard in the couple of phone calls I've had with Chris, tells me that the facts are not as the government has presented them. And I hope for a vindication for him. And if that happens, I hope that he will accept the thanks of a grateful nation for being part of the band of men who caused the Premier of Alberta to blink, who caused the Prime Minister of Canada to overplay his hand, which later marked the end of the lockdown. I believe that the truckers freed this country, not just the truckers in Ottawa, but the ones at Coutts as well. And I hope your son is acquitted. And I hope that his life going forward will be happier and with family and with justice and with freedom.
Thank you. I think that's what keeps him moving forward, is the support of people like yourself. He has lots of supporters that every day we are so thankful to, who write him letters, who donate to the cause, puts money in his canteens, and he phones some of them too, and they keep his spirits up, and we are so grateful that we can't even put it into words, because without all of you, I'm not too sure where we'd be.
Well, I was late to the party because I believed the hype.
Yeah, you're not the only one, so.
But I think that it behooves me to acknowledge, to adjust my theory based on the facts rather than the opposite.
Yeah, and I'm thankful that you were gracious enough to admit that maybe you made a mistake in the beginning.
I did.
That tells me a lot about you.
Well, you have to follow the facts wherever they lead. And I think you have to be honest with yourself.
Yes.
And I honestly did. When I first saw the charges and I first read the police accusations, I honestly did think these guys did terrible things.
Yeah.
I cannot say that now. With honor, I
hear
just
that.
can't say it.
Yeah.
And so if I can't say it, I shouldn't say it. And then I should rethink things. And I think that we can help a little bit. It's mainly on his lawyer and on the jury.
Yes.
And on the facts as they actually happened 2 years ago. But I would like to invite our people to go to helpchris.ca, because I do believe this is an injustice, and I do believe I would use the same word that I used for Tamara Leach, which is political prisoner. I just think it meets that definition.
I do. I agree with you totally. There's no doubt in my mind that he's a political prisoner. There's no doubt.
Betty, it's nice to meet you. We came down here just because we knew you were here before going back up for the hearings. And I thought, I've got to meet you beforehand, before the hurricane begins.
Yes.
And to have a chance to meet you in person and to hear the mom's point of view. And I'm glad I did, and I wish you and your family all the best.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure. Well, that's our interview with Betty Carbert. You can find out more about Chris's case at helpchris.ca.